Welcome, Jared Harris, to Google Los Angeles. We have a few fans here. We are so glad you're here today, and your wife is here, which is, if you don't follow her on Twitter, she's even more fun than Jared's Twitter.
Much more fun. And she does most of my Twitter as well.
Well, we're going to jump right in because we do have a lot to cover today, and we only have an hour. I could talk with this man all afternoon, I think. But let's start first with some Google Trends. And believe it or not, if we go back to 2004, we find that it was an interesting year around December 2011. And you might say, well, why is that? Well, it's because that's when Mad Men spiked.
Yeah.
Yes. But interestingly enough, Mad Men wasn't on the tube at that time. You were spiking, Lane Pryce was spiking. And it's because we were all binging on Netflix. So I'm curious, do you remember that spike? I know it's a little bit far back, but you were on the series at that time. What was it like when that hype hit for Mad Men?
Well, also that was December 2011 is when Sherlock Holmes' Game of Shadows came out. So it's probably got a lot to do with that as well. I remember being unemployed at that point. Well, unemployed, I mean, in between waiting for the season, then to pick back up again. What do I remember about that time? I wasn't aware of a sort of big spike of interest from around Mad Men. Particularly, I remember my agent having a little bit of problems renegotiating a new contract for season 5. So I wasn't quite even sure if I was going to be on it the next season. But yeah, for me, I remember that period mostly to do with the Sherlock Holmes movie.
Very interesting. Well, let's talk about going into that season. Because June 2012, I was doing my research, and I found this great quote that I totally related to immediately, because it stated that few characters on Mad Men had the impact that Lane Pryce did. And few events on the show were as heavy and painful and sadly real as Lane's death. Like the passing of a real loved one, it's a moment that sneaks up on you and kicks you in the gut. But his suicide hurt even more because it deftly examined so many of the ideas that Mad Men brought out as one of the best shows at that time. And with Pryce's death, Mad Men was able to stay true to characters and really to the series itself, but just knocked the wind out of you. What was that like going through that particular time for Lane?
Well, I didn't know when that season started. I had no idea that that was going to be my last season. Although there had been talk that somebody was going to be written off the show. And I remember Vincent Carthies and I were sitting and chatting, and we were sort of looking around the cast trying to figure out who it was going to be. It won't be John Hamm, obviously. Won't be Elizabeth Moss. You don't get rid of John Slattery because everything he says is funny. They just brought back Aaron onto the show, so it would be pointless to get rid of him again. You can't get rid of Christina because she's the face of the show. I think that she was the character that most people seem to respond to. So we sort of looked at each other and went, I think it's one of us. Yeah. And then after it had happened, my wife remembers this. We had lunch with Vinny, and he said, "This is all your fault." He said, "You were brought on the show to be the bad guy, to be an antagonist to Don Draper." He says, "But you turned the character into a favourable character, a sympathetic character." And Matt had told Vinny quite early on, "Don't worry, you'll never be written off the show because you never get rid of the bad guy." He said, "So the reason you're off the show is because of your vanity." I didn't know, so it was episode 10. We do read-throughs before every episode. And the read for the episode 10, Matt said he likes to chat to the actors after the read-through. is a chance for him to give them notes about specific scenes because he's not going to be there on set the whole time. So, and he said, "Oh, Jared," he says, "Yeah, I want to talk to you. Just take a seat. Hang on around a second." So he talked to everybody else, and then it was just him and me left in the conference room. And he said, "Let's go up to my office." First sign. Then he said, we were standing by the lift waiting for the lift to arrive, and he is the most brilliant company in the world. If you were sat next to him at dinner, you would be delighted. He's just the most interesting person, a brilliant conversationalist. He starts talking about the weather. Right, that's sign 2. And then third sign was when we get to the door of his office, and he says, "Would you like a shot of brandy?" And I knew I was, yes, well, I knew I was in trouble at that point. And I swore and said, "Oh God, no." And he went, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, it's bad news." But I knew immediately when he told me that it was going to be the defining character arc of that season. So it was going to be good for me, but at the same time, I was also going to be no longer working on the best show on television. So it was bittersweet. But when he started to tell me the story of how that episode was going to go, and he got to the bit where the Jaguar wouldn't start, I fell off the chair laughing. That was so funny. But again, brilliant on his part, because from a writer's point of view, he sets up the expectation that you know that something's going to go wrong for this guy, and then he pays it off with a big, big joke. So you think the whole thing is over. That whole development has been finished. So actually, when he did hang himself, it was a surprise, even though he'd signaled it, because he managed to pay it off with a joke. It's brilliant writing.
And do you feel like when you get scenes like that, do you just follow the writing, or how much do you prepare to die?
Well, you didn't see that. I mean, so the actual scene where he was dead was a makeup job. So I remember having to sort of walk from the makeup trailer to the soundstage practically with a paper bag over my head, so no one would see what it looked like, because they were worried about people taking pictures. The big scene in that story is the scene where Don fires him, and
it's like going through the stages of
grief. Yeah,
oh my gosh!
Yeah.
I just watched it again yesterday, and it is brutal to watch you go through each stage.
Yeah. Well, it was curious as well, because it's one of those things where you're sort of studying a scene, and you're trying to figure out what's happening to the character and how you're going to play the scene. And but one of the things I kept bumping into is, why doesn't he just say this? Like, I can get Lane out of this problem. I can get him out of this, because I think Don wouldn't settle for this. Or Roger wouldn't settle for this. They would throw the blackmail back into their face. The thing that with Joan. They would use all those cards to make sure this didn't happen, and he wouldn't do it. It was quite frustrating, but at the same time, that's also discovery of defining the character, because they don't do that. They won't play those cards. That was a brilliantly written scene.
Well, it was brilliantly played as well. Let's talk a little bit more about what's next in trending for you, and that's The Crown. Move ahead a few years to November 2016. That's the premiere, and you're playing this iconic character for your homeland. We've had so many King George VI. How did you put your mark on that role?
Yes, we shot that at Elstree Studios, and right outside, when I would walk out of my dressing room to go to the soundstage, there was a huge 60-foot high poster of Colin Firth as George VI in the King's Speech, because they'd shot it there. So every day I would walk out and see this thing, and I would look at it. I took it personally at first, because of course you take everything personally. I look at it and go, what the there's that thing there, you know. But after about a week, I noticed that he looked nothing like him either. And I took great solace from that I didn't have to worry about whether or not I looked, because neither of us looked like him. The focus on that character was completely different from what Colin had to do, because that story was based on an individual overcoming this a personal an impediment and a problem with that. But our story was about a father and a family, and him basically realizing that he was going to have to let go of his family before he was ready, before he realized he was going to have to, and then that sort of that concern that you would have that is she ready to take over and to try and in some way that's that big scene with Matt Smith before the duck hunting scene was to without letting him know, but he was tipping his hat towards, I'm not going to be here and you're going to have to do this job for me.
Right. I remember that scene. And another one that I truly love, it's my personal favorite, is the Christmas scene where the townsfolk come in to sing carols to the royal family. And for those of you that don't know it, the royal family is sitting there. You're right in the center. And this young little girl comes in and brings you this brilliantly homemade crown. Yeah. And I'd love for you to talk about that a minute, because for me, I saw every stage of King George at that time as a leader, as one of his subjects, you know, standing with them, and then as a father, and then as a human, knowing his mortality.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't in the script originally. That was something that came about from Stephen Daldry had the idea that he wanted something to happen that would unsettle the family, that they would have a tip-off that something wasn't quite right. And so he said, I've got this idea that when we do the carol scene, if you are comfortable with it, Jared, that you'll get up and you'll go and join them, and it'll be this strange moment. But then something happened on the way over, and it was really the carol that they were singing. And then by the time that I was walking over, there was a lyric in the carol that said, if I were a wise man, I would do my part. And it was the realization that that his opportunities to do the right thing, the smart thing, had passed him by, and that this was it. And it just so happened by accident, really. I mean, that wasn't in the script specifically, that there was that big reaction that was going to happen. It just sort of happened.
Do you discover things like that? I mean, obviously you discovered that. When you're shooting something like that, is that something that you as an actor, like, you were writing the scene, or do you think, we're going to do another take, I'm going to dig into that and kind of enrich
always beg
that
for more takes, always. Yeah, even on big budget movies, you only have 3 or 4 takes, and it's quite rare where they'll have that kind of time. You have a plan. You always have to be prepared. You have to have a plan. You have to have an idea of what you want to do, and you try and nail it on the first 2, and then beg for more takes so that you can experiment and try different stuff out. Because the real thing is we're not going to be in the editing room when they rewrite the script for the last time, and you don't know what's going to be useful in terms of the emphasis of the story and stuff like that. So you try and give them as many options as you can, that when they get to the editing room, that they have these different colors that they can use that they might not have realized or thought of at the time that were going to be useful. And you can try to plan out sort of big moments, but weirdly, the second you start to try and do that, they're so ephemeral. They'll it's almost like the imp of the perverse. The second you sit there and go, this is a scene about this, something in your subconscious will go, well, I'm not going to cooperate with you. So you've got to do something. You've got to sort of trick yourself into thinking it's about something else. And then the best time is when things just happen by accident, and you suddenly you're learning something about the role as you're doing it. And again, that's one of the different things about if you're acting on screen as opposed to acting in a play. In theatre, through rehearsal, you have a great opportunity to discover all these different facets of the part. But in film and television, you can do all the thinking you want to do in your, the bathroom, in the shower, or wherever you're doing your stuff around the house. But nothing counts until you're actually doing it, and that's when you figure out. Yes, when you learn what something is or what it isn't. It's not until you're actually doing it that you start to figure out what it is. So that's why I always think I'd like to reshoot the first week of everything I've ever done, but of course you can't do that.
We would be happy. Let's move forward a little bit now to 2019, where we are definitely seeing trends with Chernobyl. And how many of you have seen Chernobyl, or at least... Yes, excellent.
Oh, there's room for improvement in here. Yes.
If
that's
you
good.
haven't.
Yeah, I like that. Can still keep going somewhere.
Definitely, you want to hop onto the bandwagon, because it's the highest peak yet. It is spiking amazingly quick as we look across social media. And I think we have a clip that we'd like to show, and then we'll jump into a few questions.
All of the good we did, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that to them, justice was done. See, a just world is a sane world. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl.
I'm pleased to report that the situation in Chernobyl is stable. In terms of radiation, I'm told it's the equivalent of a chest X-ray.
No, Chernobyl is on fire. And every atom of uranium is like a bullet, penetrating everything in its path. Metal, concrete, flesh. Now, Chernobyl holds over 3 trillion of these bullets. Some of them will not stop firing for 50,000 years.
Tell me how to put it out.
You are dealing with something that has never occurred on this planet before.
Cut the phone lines. Contain the spread of misinformation.
What will happen to our boys?
The pain is unimaginable. In 3 days to 3 weeks, you're dead.
You can see him, and you cannot touch him. Do you understand?
What happened on the night of the accident?
Asking the right question will get you the truth. There is no truth.
What happened there? What happened after? All of it. All of it. Madness.
It's just fantastic. I mean, your work is wonderful there. And the subject matter is so intense and riveting. In addition to Emmy buzz, it is HBO's second-rated program all time after Game of Thrones, and that is saying something. Take that, Mad Men.
Coming for you.
I'm sorry?
I said we're going to come for that #1 slot.
That's right. That's right. Some of the smallest details in the sets and the script, I mean, the authenticity, the authenticity of how this particular depiction has been done and the immersion into this story, how did that help you get into this character? How did it transport you? and talk a little bit about that with us.
Yeah, the desire for the authenticity was there right from the beginning, and it was there in the script. It was there in the research that Craig did, and it was also there in a desire not to sensationalize the story, and then in all the specific departments. So, I mean, for example, one of the first interactions I had with them is when you go for the costume fitting, and it was pretty obvious that Vanity Fair was not going to be doing a photo shoot on Chernobyl. I mean, they had basically sort of small, medium, and large. And there was no retailoring of anything to fit. We had the costume assistant was Russian and had worked in the industry in the Soviet Union, and the material was really, really thick, so it sort of hung off you like a canvas tent. And again, they had somebody who came in who made sure that the glasses were. Again, they were sort of functional glasses that you did not have that many options to choose from colors. I think basically it was black or brown. And then in terms of the details in the set dressing and the production design and everything, when we first walked into the episode 5, is centered around a trial where it's basically a show trial where they're trying to blame the whole thing on human error, much the same way as, say, when a plane goes down, they would like to try and blame the pilots. Here they were trying to blame the plant operators and say there was nothing wrong with the machinery, there's nothing wrong with the design of the reactors, and there's nothing wrong with the organization. It was all down to individual error. So there's this big show trial, and that the photographs of that, which you can see online, and there's even some footage from it. It was eerie. It was exactly the same when you'd walk in, even down to the stifling heat, and these little fans that would make noises as they would sort of turn from side to side, which drove the sound designers crazy. Yeah, that feeling of authenticity was really, really important. And again, I'm sure it's the reason why they went for a European director. They went for Johan Renck, who, again, an amazing eye. And again, you can see that there's a real visual flair, but without it being, again, it's, I think, a better word than it, without trying to sensationalize it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I totally... It's just kind of the raw, visceral effect of the entire piece. Doing that, how long did it take you to shoot all 5 episodes?
5 months.
5 months. In that time, how hard was it to go home at night? And do you let it go? Do you kind of wallow in that for 5 months?
There's no time for wallowing because you've got something enormous to do the next day. I mean, as soon as something's finished, there's a sort of relief where you get that off your plate, and then you're looking ahead to... I mean, really what's happening during the day that you're shooting something, if you've got some time off, you're already trying to make sure that you're going to be ready for what's coming down the line. So... there was no...
But there are no light scenes that give you a break.
No, I asked for some comedy. I did. I made a pitch to Craig. I said, Russians have a good sense of humor. He went, there's no jokes for you. Yeah. And he can write funny as well, he wouldn't give me any funny. I really wanted some funny.
Yeah, I'm with you.
He gave me one joke. In the end, he gave me one joke. I'm not going to give it away.
Yeah, watch till the end for that joke.
It's in episode 4.
So how...
And Stellan got a couple of jokes as well, but then he's brilliant because he's brilliant at finding humor in something. So he ended up with more jokes than Craig intended. But yeah.
How hard is it to prepare for a role like that?
Well, this was a real person, so there's a lot of when you're playing a real character, there's information that's out there. So there's books. Quite often there's footage. There's audio. On this character, though, the Soviets had quite successfully cut him out of the story. They threatened to erase him from history. And so in a lot of the books that I read, he wasn't mentioned a lot. And this was probably the first time that I've played a historical character where the research wasn't really that helpful. And that was because Craig had a different thing in mind, because the relationship that the character that I play has is played in contrast to Stellan's character. So you needed to occupy a different space than Stellan's character. So, I mean, in real life, from what I saw of Legasov, he had that kind of Slavic Soviet swagger about him. He was an alpha male. He projected confidence, and that was really territory that was in Stellan's character. And so I had to find something different to serve the narrative. The things that would happen historically were all accurate, so it was authentic in that case. But you have to play you do all this research, but at the end, you're not going to play your research, you're going to play the script. And the writer has done all that research as well. And they've made decisions about what they want to use in their story and what is not necessary for their story. So you've got to play the version of the character that the writer has written for you. Otherwise, you can imagine that makes for some very tense shooting days. So you have to just, you get on board. You say yes, you get on board, and you got to do that version.
So you've mentioned on Twitter, so far I've been shot 6 times, eaten by sharks, hurled over the Reichenbach Falls, bludgeoned with a chair leg, roasted by Mount Vesuvius, hung twice, and died in my sleep. But my personal favorite is being split in half by the space-time continuum. Why do you keep dying?
Well, yeah, I don't write the scripts.
Is it typecasting?
I obviously die well, yes. I'm not sure. I mean, if they're going to kill off a character, it normally means that they want a payoff. So if your character's going to die, it's going to have an emotional resonance with the audience. So, that's it. It means that you've got the part is good. It sucks for job longevity because you have to keep finding a new job all the time. You're not going to be in the sequel, or maybe you will. Well, that tweet was in reply to someone who says that someone who'd said, that I hang myself in every role, and I was really just pointing out that was only twice. And actually, if you want to go through the different ways that my character has been killed, there's a whole way of different examples of how my characters have been knocked off, and hanging is only in 2 of them. So I really was getting at that person for shoddy research.
Yeah,
and there's a thing called Google, which you can go online and figure all that stuff out.
And then there's YouTube. Yeah. You can see the video footage.
Yeah. We should let people know about this thing.
Yeah. We'll work on it. So a lot of you may or may not know, but Jared's father also brought iconic roles to us on stage, on screen, King Arthur, Dumbledore, to say a few. I found a beautiful photo and quote that you had posted on social media. Can you tell us what it was like having Richard Harris as your father growing up?
Well, I mean, I didn't have another father, so I'd have nothing to compare it to.
But you had Dumbledore and King Arthur.
Yeah, he didn't bring his parts back with him. I have to say that about him. On the other hand, he would say that the greatest part he ever played was Richard Harris. And that there was an element about him where that he was aware of inventing himself, inventing his story, inventing his mythology, inventing his persona, and having fun with it. He was a rule breaker. I mean, when we were kids, I remember he bought a house in the Bahamas, And we went down to this house, and it was furnished with the previous owners, all of their furnishings and stuff like that. So it had all these sort of strange little tchotchkes around the place. And we'd been on this long flight coming from England. We'd been on like a 10-hour flight or something. So we were young boys, and we'd been cooped up all day, and we start kicking the ball around inside the living room. And so normally you'd be told, go and kick the ball outside. He said, I hate that figurine. I'll give you $20 if you can smash it with the football. And so we would just break stuff in the house, and he loved it. So 3 boys with that kind of sense of anarchy. I mean, it was great fun. Yeah. And then say on the other hand, when you're the child of somebody famous, there's that feeling that you're sharing that person with the world, which you slightly resent, because you want them for yourself, and everyone wants you feel ownership over your parents, and so there's a little bit of tension there, But on the other hand, if your dad is the chief of police, or your mum is the chief of police in the local town, they're a big figure. Or everyone's parents are you start off, they're gods to you, So and then you become disillusioned, and then you love them again. But so you go through a familiar thing in that same journey that everyone goes through with their parents.
Would you say that you followed in his footsteps for a profession of your own, or he had influence in you following?
I was very, very shy when I was younger. So no, I did not think that I was going to do this. Did I follow it? I mean, he was encouraging, though. I remember him. I was at Duke University, and that's when I first started to get into theatre and get into acting. And he had avoided coming down to see me in a play because he thought I was going to stink. And my mother had come down a couple of times, and she'd seen me in some plays and said, "Oh, you should really go down and see him. He's really very good." And he went, "Well, you would say that, you're his mother." I said, "No, you should go down." And he put it off until I graduated, and I did a summer play there. And he came down to come and see that. I can still hear the first laugh that I got from him. It was a play called Entertaining Mr. Sloane. And I remember it really well. I remember afterwards, when the play was over, and coming out from the dressing room, and he was really excited. And I think it was because we had something in common that we both obviously he loved it, but I was interested and passionate about it, and so we had this new connection, But he had avoided it up to that point, coming down to see me in anything. But and then afterwards, it's quite hard to talk about parts. Well, I couldn't discuss roles with him because he'd have to have read the same script that I'd read. But we would talk about classical roles, and he would act out. I remember vividly him still acting out Olivier's death scene in Coriolanus at the dinner table, which was quite spectacular because Olivier runs up this flight of stairs. He gets stabbed in the stomach with a spear, falls over backwards onto someone's shoulder, and then flipped onto a staircase and rolls all the way down the staircase, and then dies at the front of the stage like that. And he said, "It was fantastic. Here's what And then he would, we would discuss roles. And parts that he'd either had played or wanted to play, or he'd seen people play. So, we had that. We could talk about that.
I could listen to those stories, but I know we have questions out here that folks will want to ask. We do have our cube here. While we're getting the first one teed up, I have one more data point for you. Sure. So, we have a list of the top 5 states.
Okay.
Where you've been searched in the U.S. since 2004. I'll even say 50 states and the District of Columbia. So you've got 51 choices. What do you think is state number 1?
Well, obviously, it's not going to be something that I'm going to guess. So I'd say Rhode Island.
Close.
Ah,
Montana.
Montana. Well, I did a movie in Montana. Yeah, we shot.
That's why.
What did we shot? Certain Women and Robert the Bruce. Yeah.
All right. And one of your home states is
New York.
number 2. Yes. And
That's
then we
good.
have, yes.
I lived in New York for a long time. Yeah.
And then we're going to round out, I'm going to go ahead since we want to get to questions. We'll round out the top 5 with DC.
Okay.
Our government loves you.
I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing at the moment. Should be nervous.
We'll take bipartisanship when we can get it. Thank you.
Well, it depends which branch of the government was Googling me.
And then we'll finish out with Massachusetts and Idaho.
Massachusetts, really? And Idaho. I don't even. Where is Idaho?
West of Montana,
Okay.
exactly.
It's west
Yes.
of Montana?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. All right.
I would have failed that one.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Hey.
So you talked about playing historic characters. Who's one public figure you would really like to play?
Good question, and I can now plug myself. Thank you. I want to play Ulysses S. Grant again. I became fascinated with his life when I was doing the research for Spielberg's movie Lincoln, and I was really taken by how corrupted that narrative that we have of him. It's still, it is what our opinion of who he is has still been formed by the people who rewrote history essentially after that war ended, and his reputation still suffers from it. So I was fascinated by that, yeah. So thank you.
Next. One behind you.
So you've been involved in The Crown and Chernobyl, 2 nonfiction dramas, and it seems like there's a recent surge in popularity in that genre. So other than your brilliant acting, what's contributed to that?
Well, first of all, have we seen enough remakes of the same story? There's tremendous stories out there from all cultures that are being ignored, I think it's a fantastic thing that's happening. People are starting to look into history and to find these stories that can still speak to us, rather than we really need another Robin Hood, So I think it's something to do that. Plus, there's this huge explosion in the need for stories because of all these streaming platforms, and they're going to be competing with each other, and they're going to need to have new content so that people will subscribe to their services. So I think there's a hunger for stories, and one of the places that one can go to is you can look to history. So I'm all for that because I love history. I'm fascinated by every time I do a part, then you do research on it, you invariably find amazing stories that people are ignoring. Like even on something like that movie Allied, there's an incredible story that's partly inspired what that was about, but that Churchill after Dunkirk, and they are no longer able to operate forces in occupied countries. Churchill creates this thing called the SOE, and with the idea of collecting information and sending people in 4-man groups over into occupied countries to collect information and to sabotage German supply lines. But you had to have native speakers. So they were recruiting people out of language schools and then giving them a quick sort of 4-week course in how to be a spy and then sending them over there. And there was a huge attrition rate for these people. 75% of them died. Anyway, there's great stories out there.
Thank you.
not on the basketball team.
Hi. So I'm a huge fan of your father's, like Red Desert and Juggernaut and everything that he did. So thank you for speaking about him. But I'm also wondering, like, if while you were growing up, if he shared these movies with you and your brothers, or if you had to like seek them out yourself, or like how you became acquainted with his work.
Yeah. I remember going to Camelot in the theatres. I mean, I remember going to Juggernaut in the Odeon West End, Leicester Square. He didn't have screenings to sort of, hey boys, here's my newest movie. He didn't do that. But you know, yes, you go to the cinema, you go and see stuff. He would talk about things that he was about to do. He would, if there's a script that he'd done that he was excited about, he'd basically act out the whole thing for you. So you'd feel that you'd seen it a year before anyone else had. And then sometimes he'd tell us about things he was going to do, and we go, don't do that one. But he wouldn't listen to us. I remember him talking about Orca, that he was going to do Orca. And he described the story to us. We went, yeah, that's really like Jaws. It's possibly not that one. He went, no, it's completely different. It's a totally different story. So have you seen Jaws? Just no. Yeah, but it's very like Jaws, Dad. But what did I know? That turned out to be a hit.
Other questions?
If there was a backboard, that would have bounced in.
We're very good at basketball here at Google. So I'm a huge fan of The Expanse. And
same here.
It's a really great show, and I'm in particular interested in how all of the actors learn to speak a dialect that doesn't exist, with such interesting accents, and all seem to actually be expressing the same culture. Like, how did everyone learn to do that?
Yes. Well, so they invented the language, the Belter language, and then they had a dialect coach who. So when I joined it, they said, we have an accent for the Belters, like a curry. You've got mild, medium, or spicy. And like, which one do you want to do? You can do like, people can choose. And I said, well, I'm supposed to be the sort of original Belter, so I'll go for the hardest, most, the most extreme version of that accent. And they have someone there who helps you with it. They go through all your dialogue, and they'll send you the little audio clips so you can listen to it. But they leave that up to you, to whoever's playing that part, to decide what their comfort level is. But I think it was a really interesting journey for how they came up with that accent, because there's a lot of it was about 3 different things in it. There ends up being English in it, because so there was a sort of little bit of Cockney in there that wasn't originally part of the plan. But part of their idea was it's sort of 200 years in the future that there will be that Chinese will be a huge part of that language. So there was a lot of Chinese accent in it. Plus there was a little bit of there's African in there. But they were looking at where these sort of population densities would be, and that there would be the people who would have been sent out into the belt to go and work the belt. It's very well thought out. The books are amazing. I don't know if you've read the books. One of the reasons why that show works so well is because it's based on books, not unlike Game of Thrones. There's a world that has the world building has all been done before the writers sat down to figure it out. Because you don't have that much time to do that stuff if you're on a television show, because you can you'll see quite often that the pilot will be brilliant. because they'll have had a year to figure out the story of the pilot. But once they go into production, they've got 10 days to produce a script. And it's really difficult to maintain that level of quality. So if you have this source material to fall back on where the world building's all been done, you can essentially adapt. And that's why that story is working so well.
Next. Oh, we have some right there, and then we'll go right here. Thank you.
Hi, huge fan. Love Chernobyl. I watched it. But also very curious, what was it like working on Fringe?
Oh, Fringe, yeah. Fringe. I mean, that was sort of a strange one because the goalpost kept shifting on that one. I loved working on it. Personally, one of my pet hobbies is conspiracy theories. And that show is a conspiracy theorist wet dream, basically, because they can. I mean, at the end of the story, the whole explanation of the story is we live in a multiverse, and people from this other verse are crossing over into this verse, and the action of crossing over into this verse has altered our timeline. These two worlds are going to collide because you can't occupy the same space. And there's mad ideas in this show, including one where it's an animated version of the show, an episode, which was fantastic. And it's got Spock in it. Leonard Nimoy, who I just was such a huge fan. So when they said, Jared, we want to bring you back for season 4, I said, only if I've got scenes with Leonard Nimoy, I'll come back. And he said, funnily enough, yeah, we're talking to him at the moment. So, the tricky thing about something like that is they didn't know where they were going to end up. And they were constantly trying to make sure that they didn't paint themselves into a corner. So that was one of the reasons why you see them. They sort of back off from making a sort of decision about what's happening in the story. But it was great fun. I enjoyed that one.
Thank you.
Plus, that was my favorite way of dying. That's where I got cut in half by the space-time continuum. And if you're going to go, you know what I mean?
Oh. Here, I have one as well. Okay. I heard your answer about the dialect in The Expanse, which I thought was really interesting, and it sort of brought up thinking about Chernobyl, and I thought Chernobyl was one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen. It's always been a story that was fascinating to me, just because I'm really interested in disasters. But I mean, the combination of the human element of it and everything else, and I really just thought it was so brilliantly done. And so I started reading a lot about it and the production and Craig's thought process for how he put it together. And one of the things I thought was really interesting was his decision on accents, where he basically was like, okay, well, we thought about trying to have everybody do a Russian accent, and then decided it took a lot of the focus away from what we were trying to tell, and have everybody sitting there going like, well, is this person doing a good accent? Is that person doing a good accent? That acting itself can sometimes suffer when people are focusing more on the accent than on their performance. And so I was kind of curious what your thoughts were about his decision there, and how you think about accents, in roles where you're asked to do accents versus, roles where you're just told to use your normal voice.
Yeah, it's a tool you have available to describe a character, which is telling a story or one of the strands of the whole pattern of the story. I've done lots of accents. I find them useful. I enjoy doing them. With accents are like going to the gym. You have to, before you're going to need it, you have to start practicing, and you have to practice every day, and for a dedicated amount of time every day, so that you're no longer thinking about it. So by the time you come to do it, your mind is, I can focus on you, and I can notice what you're doing. I can see little changes that you're doing in the way you're playing the scene, so I can respond to you, and not have part of my head going, is this sound right? Is this sound right? Because now I can't pay attention to what you're doing. So he's absolutely right about that. Also, there's no such thing as first of all, one of the things that people have been saying about that is that why aren't they doing Russian accents? Well, it was in the Ukraine, so they would actually have Ukrainian accents and Belarusian accents. And then there's no such thing as a generic Ukrainian accent. It's the same thing if you're doing an American accent. Well, you can't just deploy a generic American accent if you're playing someone from, I don't know, Kentucky or something. It would sound ridiculous. So then you've got to become very specific about where every single character is from. Then you've got to make sure that all those people have proper resources to be able to pull it off. You probably have to have 10 dialect coaches on set, I mean, and then on the other side of it is, did it matter? Were you still going to get the idea of the story? And as Stellan Skarsgård said at Tribeca, when someone asked the question, someone said, "Well, why aren't they all speaking in accents? They should all be." Stellan said, "You've seen Hamlet many times, and it hasn't bothered you that that's in English and that they're not speaking with Danish accents." It really comes from the point of view of where you're looking at the story from. So the idea was, there's actually been some really good Twitter responses about that, about explaining about being inside the story and where your perspective is coming from the story as opposed from being outside of it. But I at the end of the day, they made a decision, and I was fine with it.
Thank you.
You still have to think about, though, what sort of accent, because that wasn't the end of the accent conversation, because then the thing is, well, we've got English actors who are going to be doing it. So I think one of the things you start to notice is that so weirdly, the way it broke down was a lot of the people who were representing the political class, they were quite often either they were Swedish or Danish actors who were speaking English with their own accent. A lot of the scientists ended up being people from a background like myself, which is essentially middle class. And then a lot of the people who were playing the workers, they ended up being regional actors. So they either had Scottish accents or Geordie accents. So they actually ended up being a differentiation made using accents in that, but they just weren't Russian or Ukrainian or Belarusian.
Thank you. I'd just like to impart a strange moment of flattery in that we have a tool here at Google called Price, which we use to document our internal negotiations.
With a Y?
Yeah, we have we document our negotiations, and we call it Price. So
is that good?
Strategic.
Didn't work out so well for him.
No, it didn't.
Has it got a sort of like your own little special embezzling app in the side there?
The core question.
That's what he gets. He got. My wife's laughing at me. Well, that's what he got done for.
It's been interesting to kind of follow on Twitter folks who live near the region or in the Ukraine respond to some of the accuracies, but you must get loads of these. I've only discovered a couple of them. I'm wondering if you can share a couple anecdotes about the folks who live there or survivors who kind of responded with yeah, it happened this way, or no, it didn't happen this way.
An amazing amount of response has been about how accurate it was, down to the license plates. One of the things that Craig had in his script was that whenever you see anything written, it was going to be in Cyrillic, and that what you saw written in Cyrillic made sense. I think there was one of the things people were talking about was in one of those, I think it's an action film that took place in Russia, and they had cut to something that was supposedly some English Russian sentence, and it was just complete gobbledygook, But I don't know why they use that. But so that yes, there was the response has been about how the detail and the authenticity was absolutely spot on. So that part's been amazing. There's a newspaper, the Moscow Times was raving over it. The Ukrainian children of first responders have been responding and saying how refreshing it was to see this story told with this kind of level of authenticity towards somebody else's culture, and that it's and added to their response, because I suppose in a sense, well, I mean, you're honouring their experience. So mostly pretty good, I'd say, like 9.9%. You can't get all. You can never win all of them, but.
We'll take one more question from the audience.
So, little story. I actually watched Chernobyl with my parents, and my dad knew Legasov.
Oh, really?
Yes, he did.
Uh-oh.
I know. Little family secret. But he was extremely grateful for your portrayal of him, so wanted to pass along a very big thank you.
Thank you.
And also my question was, when you're filming something with like such heavy material, do you ever find it difficult to like separate and actually build camaraderie on set, or does that air of heaviness kind of persist?
No, yeah, you camaraderie on set. I mean, certainly with the other actors, because you're all going through it together and you're trying to help each other out. You help each other run lines. You know someone's got a big day coming up, and you'll sit there and ask them if they want to go through it, and you'll help them get it into their heads. Really, when things are very heavy like that, you're looking for opportunities to laugh, and because that acting muscle is a nerve, and if you keep pressing on the nerve goes dead, and it'll no longer function for you. So you've really got to. You have to switch your mind to something else, and obviously if someone is trying to stay in the zone and they're trying to make sure that they're going to deliver because it's about to happen fairly soon, you don't distract them. But often you find that the heavier the material is, the more you try and joke about it afterwards, or when you're on a break or whatever. Comedy is a very serious business. Yeah, there's not much laughing on a comedy set. What was it that I'm just going to give you one quote from Edmund Kean, who was an English actor back in like the 1800s, I think. And the famous quote of his last words were, he's lying on his deathbed and somebody asks him how he is, how he feels, and he says, "Dying is easy. Comedy is hard."
Thank you.
I would normally end there, but I do want to ask, because you have a couple of projects coming up.
Oh, yeah.
What can you tell us about Morbius and the new Amazon series, Carnival Row?
Well, Morbius it's the Spider-Man, in the Spider-Man universe.
That's a switch for you, cartoons.
No, it's not cartoons.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's not. That's not.
But comics.
Yeah.
You're going into that world.
It's in the villain world, like Venom. So Morbius is a super villain in the Spider-Man universe, being played by Jared Leto. And I can't tell you too much about it other than that, because someone will shoot me when I walk out of here. And then Carnival Row is a fantasy story that's going to be, I think it's airing at the end of August. I think it is, on Amazon. And that is it's a story, it's sort of based around a kind of sort of film noir concept of a detective played by Orlando Bloom investigating a murder. And the trail of that murder sort of unravels the whole, leads him deep into the social structure and political structure of the world that he's in. The world he's in is this fantasy world that's based on, it's almost sort of based on sort of early 19th century, 18th century European history, and with the discovery and exploitation of the New World. But in this story, the New World is populated by fantasy creatures. And there's proxy wars going on, so they're flooding from that world and coming to the old world, which is creating pressures, which will probably sound familiar.
Well, it sounds exciting. It also sounds like we're going to get to see more of you, which is what I think we all want. So thank you so much, Jared, for spending time with us today.